Bhima was the strongest man who ever lived. This is not a boast or an exaggeration. It is the consistent testimony of every text in the Mahabharata tradition that touches his name. He was the son of Vayu, the god of wind, and he had carried that inheritance in his body since the day he fell from his mother's arms as an infant, struck a boulder, and shattered it without injury to himself. He had killed Baksura, and Hidimba, and Kirmira. He had wrestled with armies. He would one day kill 100 Kaurava brothers with his bare hands. There was not a weapon made or a warrior born who had been able to make Bhima doubt what his body was capable of. And then, somewhere in the forests of the Himalayan foothills, on a path fragrant with divine flowers and strange winds, he came across an old monkey lying across his way. An unremarkable, elderly, apparently sleeping monkey, thin-limbed, grey-muzzled, blocking the path with its tail curled across the forest floor, in the casual manner of something that has been in that forest long enough to feel ownership of it. Bhima asked it to move. The monkey opened one eye, looked at him, and declined. What followed in the next few minutes would be the single most important lesson in Bhima's life, a lesson not about strength, which he had always had in abundance, but about the infinite distance between physical power and actual greatness. And the teacher was not a sage or a god in his recognizable form, but his own brother, lying in the dirt with his tail across a path, waiting for exactly the moment when the most powerful man in the world would discover the precise and necessary shape of his own limitation. I am your host, Guru Acharya, and I welcome you all to this exciting new episode of the channel, The Eternal Odyssey, where we explore the stories of myths and fantasies. Chapter 1: The Forest of Exile and the Wish That Started Everything. The Pandavas were in their 12th year of forest exile when this encounter took place. 12 years of wandering through forests and mountains and river valleys, sleeping under open skies and the roofs of hermitages, stripped of the kingdoms and the armies and the gleaming halls of Indraprastha that had been theirs before the dice game, reduced everything to nothing. The exile was, in its own way, doing what exiles always do to those who survive them honestly. It was teaching the Pandavas things that no palace education could have provided, burning away the comfortable assumptions that come with power and comfort, and replacing them with the harder, cleaner knowledge that comes from living close to the ground. Among the 5 brothers, Bhima had always been the one most purely himself in the forest. He did not miss Indraprastha with the ache that sometimes crossed Yudhishthir's face, the grief of the statesman without his state. He was entirely at home in the wild. The open country suited his nature, the physical demands of the forest matched his capabilities, and the absence of courts and diplomacy and the intricate management of human hierarchies was, if he was honest, a relief. He was happy. And Draupadi, his wife and the wife of all 5 brothers, was watching this happiness and feeling something adjacent to it but not quite the same. She had her own relationship with the forest. She was the daughter of fire and the forest did not intimidate her, but she was also a woman who had been raised among beauty, and the forest beauty was wild and indifferent in ways that sometimes made her long for something specifically and deliberately lovely. On a particular afternoon, a wind moved through the camp where the Pandavas were resting, and carried with it a scent so extraordinary that everyone who breathed it stopped what they were doing. It was a flower, one specific flower, somewhere in the forest to the north, and its fragrance was unlike anything any of them had encountered, sweet and deep and luminous in the way that very few natural things are luminous, the scent of something that did not quite belong to the ordinary world. Draupadi looked at Bhima. Bhima understood. She wanted that flower. And Bhima, who had never once in his life found a reason not to give Draupadi what she wanted when it was within his capacity to get it, stood up, took his make, and walked north into the forest, toward whatever was producing that impossible scent. Chapter 2. The Path into the Sacred Wild. The Sogandhika flower, which is what the fragrant bloom was, a divine lotus that grows only in the celestial gardens of Kuber, the Lord of Wealth and the guardian of the northern realms, was not something a human being could simply walk to and pick. The path to it passed through increasingly sacred and increasingly restricted terrain, the forests of the Himalayan foothills that gradually give way to landscapes that the texts describe as belonging to a different order of reality than the ordinary world, places where the boundaries between the human realm and the divine become permeable, where the rules that govern what is possible in the world of men begin to lose their certainty. Bhima walked through all of it without particular concern. This is one of the qualities that makes him such a compelling figure in the Mahabharata. He is not stupid, not unaware of the significance of the terrain he is entering, but his confidence in his own physical capability creates a kind of forward momentum that does not easily accommodate the concept of terrain too sacred to simply walk through. He was going to find those flowers for Draupadi, and the nature of the country between here and the flowers was, in his working assessment, a problem to be solved when encountered rather than a reason to reconsider the expedition. The forest deepened around him. The trees grew larger, older, the kind of trees that the tradition describes as having witnessed the events of previous ages. Their roots sunk into the earth deep enough to touch the memories of the world. The sounds changed, fewer birds of recognizable species, more of the particular quality of silence, that is not the absence of sound but the presence of attention, the feeling that the forest itself is aware of the being moving through it, and has opinions about the intrusion. Bhima noticed all of this and kept walking. His make was on his shoulder. He was thinking about Draupadi's face when he brought the flowers back. And then he came around a bend in the path and found his way blocked. Chapter 3. The Monkey in the Path. It was an old monkey. This is the detail the Van Parva of the Mahabharata insists upon, with a consistency that is clearly intentional, old, not young and powerful, ordinary in appearance, not obviously divine or imposing, lying down, not standing in challenge. The tail was what blocked the path, a long, heavy tail stretched across the forest floor from one side of the path to the other, as complete and effective a barrier as a fallen tree, and considerably more deliberately placed. The monkey's eyes were closed. It appeared to be sleeping or resting, with the absolute comfort of something that feels entirely at home in its surroundings, and has no particular interest in the approach of a large armed man. Bhima stopped. He assessed the situation with the practical intelligence that was always present underneath his physical confidence. He saw an old monkey. He saw a tail across the path. He saw a simple solution: ask the monkey to move, and if the monkey did not move, step over the tail, and if the tail was too wide to step over, move it. He approached. He introduced himself, and here the Mahabharata records a detail that is worth noting, because Bhima does not introduce himself modestly. He tells the monkey who he is with the full weight of his lineage and his accomplishments, the way someone announces themselves when they expect the announcement to carry significance. He is Bhima, son of Vayu, son of Kunti, Pandav prince, the strongest man in the three worlds. He asks the monkey, with reasonable courtesy, to move its tail so he can pass. The monkey opened one eye. It regarded Bhima with an expression the text does not describe in detail, but which every reader who has encountered a truly ancient being, animal or human or divine, will recognize the expression of something that has been waiting a very long time and finds the wait, on the whole, more interesting than the arrival. The monkey said, with genuine tranquility, "I am old and unwell, and I am resting. I cannot move. If you wish to pass, you are welcome to move my tail yourself." Chapter 4. The moment the strongest man in the world failed. Bhima bent down and took hold of the tail. The Vana Parva records what followed with a restraint that is more devastating than any elaborate description could be. He could not move it. Not slightly. Not a fraction. He gripped the tail with the hands that had strangled Baksura, that had broken Jarasandha's spine, that had held the weight of mountains in combat, and the tail did not move. He gripped harder. He set his feet, planted them in the forest floor with the full leverage of his massive frame, and he pulled. Nothing. The tail lay on the forest floor as though it were rooted there, as though it were not attached to an aging monkey, but to the earth itself, to something fundamental beneath the surface of the visible world, that no amount of physical force could shift. Bhima's face changed. This is what the story is really about, not the tail, not the strength, but the moment on Bhima's face and in his chest, when the framework he had built his entire identity around encountered something it could not account for. He was the strongest. He had always been the strongest. In every contest, in every battle, in every physical confrontation of his life, there had been a ceiling he could reach if he pushed hard enough, a limit to the resistance the world could offer, and he had always been on the right side of that limit. Now there was a tail. An old monkey's tail. And he could not move it. He tried again. The Mahabharata does not record exactly how many attempts he made, which is itself a kind of mercy, and again the tail held. He straightened up. He looked at the monkey, which was watching him now with both eyes open, and an expression that contained no mockery, no triumph, no condescension of any kind. Simply attention, and behind the attention, the particular quality of patience that belongs to something that has existed for a very long time. Bhima, the son of Vayu, the second Pandav, the man who had never genuinely encountered his physical limit in his entire life, stood in a forest in the Himalayan foothills and understood that he was, in this moment, completely helpless. And then something extraordinary happened to him. Instead of rage, instead of denial, instead of the defensive aggression that pride typically produces when it is cornered, he felt something open. He folded his hands. He bowed his head. He asked the monkey, with genuine humility and genuine curiosity, who it was. Chapter 5. The Revelation in the Forest. The transformation is one of the most celebrated moments in the entire Mahabharata, not a battle, not a divine weapon, not a cosmic event shaking the foundations of the three worlds, but an old monkey on a forest path slowly allowing its true form to be seen. The Vana Parva describes it with the language it reserves for genuine revelation. The monkey grew. Not quickly, not dramatically in the manner of a god announcing himself, with light and sound and the trembling of the earth, but steadily, the way a truth becomes visible when the person looking is finally ready to see it, expanding in the dappled forest light, until the form that had been lying across the path was vast, and golden, and unmistakable. The tail that Bhima had been unable to move stretched now across the forest canopy. The eyes that had watched him with ancient patience were the eyes of a being who had once leapt across an ocean, who had carried a mountain in his hands, who had set a city on fire with his own burning tail and walked through the flames unharmed. The monkey was Hanuman, the son of Vayu, the servant of Rama, the Chiranjeevi, the eternally living one, who had been present at the great events of the Treta Yuga, and who was present still, in this age, in this forest, on this path, waiting for the one person in the three worlds who shared his blood and could benefit from this specific lesson. Bhima fell to his knees. Not from weakness, Bhima did not fall to his knees easily, and the Mahabharata is careful about the moments when he does. He fell because what was in front of him required it. Not simply because of the power he was in the presence of, though that power was immeasurable, but because of the recognition, this was his brother. His own brother, born from the same divine father, carrying the same vine god inheritance in his body, existing across a different age but connected to him by a bond that the universe had not allowed either of them to forget. Chapter 6, Brothers Across Ages. The conversation that took place between Bhima and Hanuman in that forest is recorded in the Vanya Parva with a fullness that suggests the original composers understood they were preserving something of profound significance. It was not simply the reunion of two half-brothers who happened to share a divine father, it was the meeting of two expressions of the same essential nature, across the gap of an entire cosmic age, each having developed in ways the other could not have anticipated, each carrying gifts the other needed. Hanuman embraced Bhima. He called him brother without hesitation or qualification, the way people who share blood recognize each other across any distance or any disguise. He told him the truth of why he was there, not wandering accidentally through these particular woods, but present with intention, drawn to this forest at this time by the knowledge that the son of Vayu who walked these paths needed to encounter something that his life had not yet provided. And then Hanuman told Bhima about himself, not in the manner of a teacher delivering a lesson, not with the distance of a divine being instructing a lesser mortal, but in the way of an older brother telling his own story to a younger one, directly, fully, without embellishment and without omission. He told him about Rama. He told him about the search for Sita, the building of the bridge, the crossing of the ocean that had seemed impossible until it was not. He told him what it meant to serve someone not from obligation or fear or calculation of reward, but from love that was so complete it left no room for any other motivation. He told him what he had learned about the difference between physical strength, which both of them had in abundance, which was a gift of their divine parentage, and the kind of power that comes from understanding what the strength is for. Physical strength without direction is catastrophe, Hanuman told him. It is the flood that destroys without choosing, the fire that burns without discriminating. The direction that gives strength its meaning, that transforms raw capability into something that serves the world, is devotion. Not the devotion of ritual or obligation, but the devotion of a being who has found the thing worthy of its full capacity, and has offered that capacity completely, without reservation, forever. Chapter 7. The gift Bhima could not have found anywhere else. Bhima listened to all of this with a particular quality of attention. He brought two things that genuinely surprised him. Completely, physically, his entire large frame oriented toward the words he was hearing, the way an animal in the wild orients toward a sound that does not fit the expected patterns of its environment. He had come into this forest looking for flowers. He had found, instead, the one thing his life had been quietly missing, and had not known it was missing, because nothing in his experience had yet made its absence felt. He had always had strength. He He had always had courage, raw, physical, uncalculating courage that expressed itself as forward motion in the face of whatever obstacle presented itself. What he had not had, until this forest, this path, this tale he could not move, was the direct, visceral experience of his own limitation. The Mahabharat's treatment of Bhima is sometimes misread as the tradition's portrait of brute strength, in contrast to Arjuna's refined skill or Yudhishthir's moral wisdom. But the Bhima of the Van Parva, sitting in the forest with Hanuman's hand on his shoulder, is something considerably more interesting than a portrait of brute strength. He is a man discovering the shape of his own nature for the first time, discovering that the son of Vayu, who he had always understood himself to be, the physical expression of divine power walking in human form, was only the surface of an inheritance that went much deeper than what his body could lift or break or carry. Hanuman was the fuller expression of what they both were, the son of Vayu who had turned his divine inheritance entirely towards something beyond himself, who had become not simply powerful but purposeful, who had found in the service of Rama the direction that transformed his strength from a personal attribute into a cosmic instrument. Bhima could not become Hanuman. He was not meant to. He had his own path, his own enemies, his own dharma to fulfill in the Kurukshetra war that was still in his future. But he could carry something back from this forest that would change the quality of everything he did from this day forward. The knowledge that the strongest man in the world had knelt before his brother, had found a tail he could not move, and had discovered in that helplessness not defeat, but the doorway to a larger understanding of what he was. Chapter 8: The Blessing and the Promise. Before they parted, Hanuman gave Bhima two things. The first was the Saugandhika flowers, the divine lotuses whose fragrance had drawn Bhima into the forest, the flowers that Draupadi had wanted, the ostensible reason the entire journey had been undertaken. He gave them freely, with the generosity of a being for whom material gifts are simply the visible expression of an invisible care. "Take them to Draupadi," he said. "She asked for something beautiful, and she should have it." But the second gift was the one that the tradition has carried forward across every retelling, because it was not a physical thing at all, it was a promise. Hanuman told Bhima that when the great war came, as both of them knew it would come, he would be present. Not on the battlefield in his own form. That was not how Hanuman moved through the world of the Kali Yuga, not how the Chiranjeevi makes his presence felt in the ages after his own. But he would be present on the flag of Arjuna's chariot. His form would fly above the battle, his roar would be in the war cry that the Pandavas raised when they charged, his energy would move through every arrow Arjuna loosed, and every blow Bhima struck, and every step the five brothers took toward the justice that the war was being fought to restore. He would be there, as he had always been there for the right years, as he had been there for Rama, not as a separate power descending from outside the struggle, but as something woven into the capacity of those who were fighting for what was right, making their strength slightly more than it would otherwise have been, their courage slightly steadier, their aim slightly truer. This is what brotherhood means across the ages, and across the distance between one cosmic era and another, not the same story lived simultaneously, but the same love expressed through the specific forms and specific battles that each age requires. Bhima stood up from the forest floor, took the flowers in his hands, and looked at his brother. The Mahabharata does not record what he said in this final moment, and perhaps that is correct, because some recognitions are too complete for language, some reunions too large for the ordinary containers of speech. He bowed. He turned. He walked back south through the forest toward the Pandav camp, carrying flowers that smelled like heaven and a knowledge that weighed nothing and changed everything. Chapter 9. What the forest gave back to the world. The encounter between Bhima and Hanuman in the forest of the Gandhamadhan hills is preserved in the Van Parva of the Mahabharata with a care that tells you the original composers knew they were recording something that was not simply an episode in a story, but a teaching about the nature of power itself. Two sons of Vayu. Two expressions of the same divine inheritance. One of them certain of his strength, carrying it forward like a weapon constantly ready to be used, knowing himself primarily by what he could overcome. The other wearing his strength like a garment so long worn it had become invisible, having long ago located the force that gave his strength its direction, knowing himself not by what he could defeat, but by what he was devoted to. The tale that Bhima could not move was not a test of physical strength, it was an invitation into a different understanding of what strength is. Because Hanuman could have moved that tail. He could have stood up, lifted it out of the path, allowed Bhima to pass without incident, and the meeting would never have happened. He chose not to humiliate a brother, but to give him something that could only be given through the experience of limit. The universe, in its deep and patient wisdom, arranges these encounters, the moments when the framework we have built around our own capability meets something it cannot account for, not as punishments but as education. The strongest man in the world needed to know that strength without humility is a house without a foundation. He needed to know it not as a concept explained by a sage in a hermitage, not as a verse memorized from a scripture, but in his hands, in his muscles, in the specific and undeniable sensation of pulling with everything he had, and feeling absolutely nothing yield. That knowing, the knowing that lives in the body, that cannot be unlearned or explained away, is what Hanuman gave his brother in the forest. And Bhima, to his eternal credit, received it. He did not rage. He did not deny. He knelt. And in kneeling, he became larger than he had been when he arrived, not physically, but in the only dimension that the forest, and the meeting, and the tale had ever been concerned with. Bhima left that forest the same man in body. In everything else, he was someone his brother had made new. The strongest man who ever lived knelt before his brother in a forest, because a tale he could not move taught him the one lesson his strength never could. He arrived looking for flowers and left carrying wisdom that would travel with him all the way to Kurukshetra. That is what the great stories of the Mahabharata always do. They take you somewhere you think you understand, and show you something you had no idea was waiting. If this story did that for you today, then do not let it pass without acting on it. Hit that like button right now. It is the smallest possible gesture in return for a story 4,000 years in the making, and it means the world to a channel that gives everything it has to bring these stories to you with the depth and the care they deserve. Share this with someone who loves the Mahabharata, or with someone who has never opened it, and does not yet know that it contains everything, every question about power and humility and brotherhood, and what we are actually for. And subscribe, because every week we return to these ancient forests, and these ancient courts, and these ancient conversations between beings who knew things we are still learning, and we bring back what we find for you, completely and without shortcuts. The forest is still full of old monkeys with immovable tails. The flowers are still out there. And we will never stop walking toward them. Jai Bajrangbali, Jai Bhim. See you until next time. Thank you.